Hello everyone, my name is Evan Mercer. I'm 32 years old, and until that morning, I believed Mercer Hollow Farm would outlive all of us. The day my father looked me in the eye and said, "We sold the farm," I didn't react right away. I thought he was testing me, seeing how I'd respond, but he wasn't. I was standing in the middle of Mercer Hollow, dry soil pressed into the seams of my boots, the wind cutting low across the corn rows like it had something to say and didn't care if I wanted to hear it. This land had been in my family longer than my name had been mine. My grandfather used to say the ground remembered everything, every season, every storm, every man who thought he owned it. My father didn't ease into it, didn't set it up. He just said it. "It's done," Dean Mercer announced, loud enough for the hired hands near the equipment shed to turn their heads. "Sold to a developer, contract signed." My mother, Elaine, stood beside him with her arms folded, chin slightly raised, wearing that same tight smile she used when she corrected me in front of other people. Behind them stood a man in a pressed shirt holding a folder, checking his watch like this was just another stop on his calendar. But something in that moment didn't line up. My grandfather's estate hadn't even been settled yet, and land like this doesn't move quietly. They thought I'd argue. They thought I'd raise my voice, make it easy to dismiss me. I didn't. I blinked once. "You sold it before probate was even opened," I said. My father's eyes narrowed, like I'd crossed a line instead of stating a fact. "He's gone," he snapped. "This was ours to deal with." I didn't respond to that, because before that week was over, I was going to pull every record they were counting on no one checking. And when those records surfaced, whatever they thought they'd secured was going to come apart. Mercer Hollow wasn't just land. It was the only place in my life that never tried to be anything else. My grandfather, Walter Mercer, didn't talk much. He didn't need to. Most of what he taught me happened without explanation. You learned by doing, or you didn't learn at all. Fix the fence before the storm hits. Walk the boundary lines after heavy rain. Check the irrigation twice. Not because it's broken, but because it might be. I spent more time beside him than I ever did inside the house. I learned how to drive a tractor before I had a license. Learned how to read soil by the way it broke in your hand. Learned which parts of the land held water longer, and which ones turned hard too fast in summer heat. He didn't call it inheritance. He called it responsibility. One afternoon, years ago, I found him on the porch with a ledger open across his lap. There was a manila envelope resting against his knee. He tapped it once, not looking at me. "People change when land turns into money," he said. That was it. No lecture, no follow-up. At the time, I thought he meant neighbors, boundary disputes, taxes, the usual things that come with property. I didn't think he meant family. Mercer Hollow carried more than crops. It held every version of us that had worked it. My grandfather understood that. He protected it like it mattered, because it did, and somewhere along the way, he decided I would be the one to do the same. Not because I asked for it, because I stayed, because I paid attention, because I didn't look at the land and see a number. I looked at it and saw something that wasn't supposed to be handed over to the highest bidder between breakfast and lunch, which is exactly what my parents had just done. And that told me something else. This wasn't just a bad decision, it was a deliberate one. My father stepped closer, boots grinding into the dirt like he needed the sound to carry authority. "Sign the papers," he said, shoving a stack toward me. "And stop making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't take them right away. I let the edge of the stack hover between us, just long enough to make it clear I wasn't moving on his timeline. "Sign what I asked. Consent, acknowledgement, whatever the lawyers call it," he snapped. "You don't own anything here, but this keeps things clean." My mother leaned in, slightly, her voice softer, sharper. "You've always liked pretending you're in charge," Elaine said, glancing past me toward the man with the folder. "It's almost impressive." I ignored that. Instead, I looked at him. "Who are you?" He adjusted his grip on the folder, offering a practiced smile. "Scott Ellison, Iron Gate Development. We're planning a residential expansion, housing, infrastructure, long-term value for the county." He said it like he was reading from a script he'd used 100 times before, like this land was already gone. I turned back to my father. "If it's already sold, give me the probate file number." His jaw tightened. "You don't need that." "I do," I said, "because if the estate hasn't been opened, you don't have authority to transfer anything." My mother let out a short laugh. "Listen to him," she said lightly, "always talking like he's in a courtroom." I didn't respond to her. "Which title company?" I asked. My father's eyes narrowed. "That doesn't matter." "It does," I said evenly. "If the deed transferred, it's recorded. If it's not recorded, it doesn't exist." For a second, there was a shift. Small, but real. My mother's eyes flicked toward Scott Ellison. Not long. Just enough. My father pushed the papers forward again. Harder this time. "Sign it," he said, "or stand there and watch what happens without you." I took the stack. Not to cooperate. To read. The first page told me everything I needed to know. No case number, no probate reference, no instrument number, just a block of vague language and a blank line waiting for a signature. It wasn't documentation, it was pressure. I handed it back. "I'm not signing anything on the hood of your truck," I said. "If it's legitimate, it can survive a record search." My father's face darkened. "Don't do this. Evan, do what I asked. Check the record." My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You always needed to prove something," she said quietly. "That's why you never left this place." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because whatever they thought this was, it wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a discrepancy. And discrepancies don't get argued. They get verified. For a moment, no one said anything. The wind moved through the corn in slow, steady waves, brushing against the edge of the barn and carrying the faint smell of diesel and dry soil. It was the same sound I'd grown up with, the same rhythm my grandfather used to stand still and listen to, like it was telling him something worth hearing. I glanced past my parents toward the farmhouse. The porch sagged slightly on the left side, exactly where it always had. The old pine tree beside it still leaned at the same angle my grandfather refused to correct, said it had earned the right to stand the way it wanted. That was the thing about him. He didn't fix what wasn't broken. He protected what mattered. Years ago, one summer after I'd come back from a job out of state, I found him sitting on that porch with a ledger open across his lap. The same one he used to track yields, expenses, repairs. Numbers that most people ignored, but he treated like they meant something. There was a manila envelope resting against his knee. He tapped it once without looking at me. "Someday," he said, "you'll need proof." I didn't ask what he meant back then. I thought he was talking about boundary disputes or taxes, the usual things people argue over when land is involved. He shook his head slightly, like he already knew I wasn't thinking far enough ahead. "People get creative when land turns into money," he added. That was all he said. No explanation, no warning about who, just the envelope, standing there now, with my father pushing paperwork and a developer waiting for my signature. That memory landed differently. He hadn't been talking about strangers. He'd been preparing me for this. And somewhere, in a place my parents clearly hadn't accounted for, there was proof, I just hadn't seen it yet. My father was still talking, something about timelines, about how the deal was already done, about how I was the only thing slowing it down. I stopped listening. There was nothing left to argue. I handed the papers back without another word, turned, and walked to my truck. No slammed door, no gravel spinning under the tires, no performance, just a decision. By the time I reached the end of the farm road, I already knew where I was going. Blackstone County land records. Because whatever my parents had done, it had to pass through that building, and if it passed through there, it left a trace. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot. The building looked exactly like every county office I'd ever seen, flat, quiet, a little outdated, like it hadn't changed since the early 2000s. Inside, the air carried that familiar mix of toner, paper, and something faintly metallic from old filing cabinets. A small sign on the wall read, "All records are public. Good." I walked to the counter and waited. The clerk looked up after a few seconds, mid-50s, glasses hanging from a thin chain, the kind of person who had seen every version of a family dispute come through that door. "Address," she asked. I gave it to her. "I need the deed history for Mercer Hollow Farm," I said, "and any probate filings under Walter Mercer." She nodded once and started typing. The sound of the keyboard filled the room, louder than it should have been. I watched the reflection of her monitor flicker across her lenses as she moved through the system. Then she paused. Not the kind of pause you get from a slow database. The kind that comes when something doesn't match. She clicked again. Leaned in, slightly. "What's your name?" she asked. "Evan Mercer, and your relationship to Walter Mercer, grandson." She studied me for a second longer than necessary, then nodded. "One moment." She stood and walked toward the back shelves. When she came back, she wasn't carrying a binder. She set a thin folder on the counter, with more care than the size of it justified. "The parcel shows a recent transfer," she said. My pulse didn't spike. It narrowed. "Recorded?" I asked. She nodded. Yesterday, while I was at work. While my phone stayed quiet. While my parents were already moving ahead like nothing could catch up to them. I didn't react. "Print the last 2 recorded instruments," I said. "Include grantor information and instrument numbers." She turned to the printer. The machine hummed, then fed out 2 sheets barcodes, stamps, official formatting. She placed them in front of me. "Buyer Iron Gate Development." That part didn't surprise me. The line underneath did. "Grantor Estate of Walter Mercer." I kept my expression neutral. "Where's the probate case?" I asked. The clerk frowned slightly, turning back to her screen. "That's the problem," she said. The estate hasn't been opened, the clerk said slowly, her eyes still on the screen. There's no active probate case under Walter Mercer in Blackstone County. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Then how was estate property transferred? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her fingers moved across the keyboard again. Faster this time, pulling from a different system. The room stayed quiet, except for the soft hum of the printer cooling down behind her. She scrolled once, then stopped. There was a slight shift in her expression, not confusion, recognition. "There's an attached packet," she said. "Older scan." She clicked again, opening a secondary window. A small folder icon appeared on the screen, labeled simply, "Deposited Will Packet." The air in the room changed. The clerk leaned closer, then lowered her voice just enough that the people at the other counters wouldn't hear. "This was never filed," she said quietly, "but it changes ownership." For a second, I didn't respond. Not because I didn't understand, because I understood exactly what that meant. If a will existed, and it had been sitting here, unfiled, then my parents hadn't just moved fast. They'd moved around something. "Print it," I said. "Certified copy if possible." She hesitated. "I can print what's scanned," she said. "Certification will need approval." "I'm not asking for advice," I replied. "I'm asking for records." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." As she started pulling the file up for printing, she paused again. Her eyes moved to a section of the interface I hadn't noticed before. "Before I print this," she said, "I need to check something." "What access logs?" I didn't speak. She clicked into another panel. Lines of entries populated the screen. Timestamps, user IDs, request types. "When something shows up like this, after a transfer," she said, scrolling slowly, "it usually means someone already knew it was here." Her eyes narrowed, then stopped. For half a second, she looked at me, just long enough to tell me the answer mattered. "It was opened yesterday," she said quietly. "By who?" She clicked once more. The name appeared. Not mine, not my father's, my mother's. "Viewed by Elaine Mercer." Timestamp yesterday. 10:12 a.m., less than an hour before the transfer had been recorded. My throat went cold. Not panic, clarity. "So she came here," I said. The clerk nodded once. "She used a public terminal for a records request. That creates a trace. A trace. The best kind. I need that printed," I said. "The access log, the will packet, and certified copies of the recorded instruments." She straightened slightly. "I'll need my supervisor for certification. Get them." She disappeared through a door behind the counter. I stood there holding the 2 deed records, staring at the line that read, "Estate of Walter Mercer," like it was waiting for me to catch up. A moment later, someone stepped up beside me. Evan. I didn't have to turn to know the voice. Claire. She must have driven over when I didn't answer her texts. She looked at the papers in my hand, then at my face. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "There's a will," I said, "and my mother opened it yesterday." Her expression tightened. She knew. "Yes." Behind the counter. The door opened again. The clerk returned with a man in a gray cardigan, badge clipped to his belt, late 50s, measured posture, the kind of person who didn't rush anything because he didn't need to. "Evan Mercer," he asked. "Yes." He glanced at the documents in my hand, then at the monitor. "You requested deed history and probate records," he said. "I requested the authority behind a transfer recorded yesterday," I replied. "There's no probate case, but there's a deposited will packet that was never filed." His eyes narrowed slightly. "That packet," he said carefully, "was deposited for safekeeping. That tract, my grandfather hadn't trusted chance. I need a certified copy." "We can certify that it's a true copy of what's stored," he said, "but it hasn't been admitted to probate." "I understand." He nodded once, then turned to the clerk. "Print it." The printer started again. This time, it ran longer, multiple pages feeding out, one after another. He watched the machine the way someone watches evidence. When it finished, he gathered the pages, added a certification sheet, stamped it, signed it, and placed the packet in front of me. I didn't rush. I turned the first page slowly. Last, Will and Testament of Walter Mercer. My eyes moved down, scanning past the formal language, the legal framing, until they reached the part that mattered. Property description, parcel numbers, boundary lines, no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Then the line that changed everything. The farm wasn't split. It wasn't delayed. It wasn't conditional. It was mine. Sole beneficiary. Executor. I didn't react outwardly. I didn't need to. Beside me, Claire leaned in to read. I felt her breath catch. "He gave it to you," she said under her breath. "Yes." There was another page. I turned it. A clause. Clean. Direct. Written by someone who knew exactly how families break when money enters the room. No contest. Challenge the will. Risk losing everything. I looked back up at the supervisor. If this existed, I said evenly, how was estate property transferred without probate? He didn't flinch. We record documents that meet formatting standards. He said, ownership is determined by the court. So what did they file? He gestured toward the clerk. She pulled up the recorded instrument again, opening the attachment list. Her expression hardened as she read. Affidavit of heirship, of course. Fast, simple, and easy to lie on. She opened it. It states Walter Mercer died without a will, she said. Lists heirs as Dean and Elaine Mercer. Claims authority to transfer the property. I stepped closer. Signatures both notarized. Witnesses too, she said, but she paused. Same P.O. box listed for both. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. And this, she added, was recorded before the will packet was accessed. I looked at her. My mother accessed it yesterday. She nodded, which means she saw it, and filed this anyway. The room felt smaller, tighter, not from pressure, from precision. Print everything, I said. Certified copies of the affidavit, the transfer, and the access log. The supervisor nodded. We can do that. While they started the process, I stepped aside and pulled out my phone. There was only one call that mattered now. Rachel Kincaid. She answered on the second ring. Evan, my parents, filed an affidavit claiming no will. I said, transferred the farm yesterday. The county just confirmed there's a deposited will naming me beneficiary and executor. My mother accessed it before filing. Silence. Short. Focused. Okay, she said. You're filing for probate today. Emergency petition. And we're recording notice against the property, so the buyer gets flagged. Yes, no clean title, no movement. And if they try anyway, then we stop them. I looked back at the printer feeding out certified documents, one after another. Good, I said, because this wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a record, and the record was finally starting to speak. The printer slowed, then stopped. The last page slid out with a soft mechanical click, and for a moment, no one reached for it. The supervisor gathered the stack instead, aligning the edges carefully, adding a certification sheet, stamping it with the kind of precision that didn't leave room for doubt. Ink, seal, signature. Then he placed the packet in front of me. I didn't rush. I turned the first page slowly, letting the weight of it settle before I moved forward. Last, will and testament of Walter Mercer. The language was formal, expected, legal framing, declarations, standard clauses. My eyes moved past all of it without stopping. That wasn't what mattered. I went straight to the section where words become ownership. The property description filled half the page. Mercer Hollow Farm, laid out in exact terms, parcel numbers, boundary lines, survey references, every inch defined in a way that couldn't be reinterpreted later. My grandfather hadn't left anything open to interpretation. He never did. Then I reached the line. No split, no shared interest, no delay. The farm was left to me, sole beneficiary. I didn't blink. I didn't need to. But my body registered it anyway, tightening across my chest. Something settling into place with a finality I hadn't felt since my grandfather died. There was no ambiguity here, no room for my parents to handle things. They had never had control. They had taken it. I turned the next page. Executor designation. My name again. Not as an option, as instruction. Walter Mercer hadn't just given me the land. He had put me in charge of protecting it, beside me. Claire leaned closer, reading over my shoulder. I felt the shift in her breathing before she spoke. He made you the executor too, she said quietly. Yes. That word felt different now. Not confirmation, responsibility. I flipped to the next section. A clause. Short, direct. The kind of language written by someone who had seen families tear themselves apart and decided not to leave room for interpretation. No contest. Any challenge to the will, any attempt to undermine it risked forfeiting everything tied to it. My jaw tightened slightly. That clause wasn't there to protect me. It was there to test them, and they'd already failed. I looked back up at the supervisor. This was deposited here, I said, for safekeeping. He nodded once. Yes, and it was never filed. Correct. Which meant my grandfather had expected something like this. Expected someone to move before the record caught up. I glanced back down at the pages. The legal description, the designation, the structure. It wasn't just a will. It was a system, built to hold under pressure. Claire's voice came softer this time. They tried to sell something they didn't own. I didn't answer, because that wasn't the part that mattered. Not anymore. I looked at the clerk. If the will existed here, I said evenly, and there's no probate case, how did they transfer estate property yesterday? She didn't hesitate this time. They filed an affidavit, I already knew, of heirship, she added, claiming there was no will. I nodded once. Show me. She pulled it up again. turning the monitor slightly so I could see. There it was, clean formatting. Official language, signed, notarized. A document designed to move fast and ask no questions. Statement of no will, list of heirs, authority to transfer. Every line built on something that wasn't true. I didn't look at the whole thing. I went straight to the names. Dean Mercer, Elaine Mercer, my parents, signing under oath that the will didn't exist. After my mother had already opened it, after she'd already seen exactly what it said, I stepped back slightly, not from shock, from clarity, because this wasn't just a dispute anymore. This wasn't even about ownership. It was fraud. Documented, time-stamped, certified, and now, finally, provable. Print it all, I said. The clerk didn't hesitate this time. She moved through the system with a kind of quiet efficiency, selecting the affidavit, the transfer instrument, the access log. The printer started again steady, mechanical, indifferent to what it was producing. Paper doesn't care who it ruins. The supervisor stayed beside her, watching each page come through, adding certifications where required, stamps, signatures, every mark turning something my parents thought they could bury into something permanent while they worked. I stepped to the side and called Rachel Kincaid. She answered before the second ring. Evan, they filed an affidavit of heirship, I said, claimed there was no will, transferred the farm yesterday. The will's here deposited, never filed. Names me beneficiary and executor. And my mother accessed it before they filed. There was a brief pause, not confusion, calculation. Okay, Rachel said, we're not debating this, we're moving. I'm at the records office. Good. I need certified copies of the will, the affidavit, the recorded transfer, and anything showing your mother accessed that file. I'll have them in minutes. Then listen carefully, she said. You're filing for probate today. Emergency petition. We open the estate and establish authority immediately. So the transfer gets challenged. It gets boxed in. She corrected. We also record a notice of probate and a notice of pending action against the parcel. That clouds the title. No clean title, I said. No closing, no development. No one touches that land without stepping into a legal fight they don't want. I glanced toward the printer as another set of pages slid out. And if they try anyway, then we stop them in court, she said. And if they cross the line physically, we escalate. I nodded once, even though she couldn't see it. Send me the documents as soon as you have them, she added. Don't confront your parents. Let the record do the work. I wasn't planning to. I know, she said. That's why this works. The line went dead. I didn't move for a second. Just let the sequence settle. Probate, notice, record, restrict. Everything had a place. Everything had an order. And for the first time since my father said the words, we sold the farm, the situation felt controlled, not by them, by the process. The clerk approached with the first set of certified documents. She placed them on the counter one by one. Affidavit of heirship, she said. I glanced down. There it was again. Clean. Official. Wrong. Recorded transfer instrument. Another page. Another stamp. Another timeline locked in place. And the access log. She hesitated slightly before placing the last sheet down. This is internal, she said, but it shows the request activity. I picked it up. User Elaine Mercer. Request deposited will packet timestamp yesterday, 10:12 a.m. There was one more page attached. A receipt. She tapped it lightly. This is the copy request history, she said. I looked down. Name, timestamp, item description, deposited will packet, copy fee paid. My mother hadn't just opened the file. She had paid for a copy, printed it, held it in her hands, then signed a sworn statement saying it didn't exist. Something in my chest shifted, not anger, finality, because there was no version of this where they didn't know what they were doing. No misunderstanding, no confusion, just intent. I set the page back down. I need everything certified, I said. The supervisor nodded. You'll have it. While they finalized the documents, I stepped aside and pulled out my phone again. This time, I called someone else. Iron Gate Development. The number was on the paperwork my father had pushed at me earlier. The call connected on the second ring. Iron Gate Development. My name is Evan Mercer, I said. The property you believe you purchased, Mercer Hollow Farm, is now subject to a pending probate action. A will has been located and filed. There's a recorded notice being placed against the parcel. There was a pause, then a shift in tone. One moment. A new voice came on, measured, controlled. Patrick Haynes, legal counsel, he said. Mr. Mercer, your parents represented that they had authority to transfer the property as heirs. They represented falsely, I said. They filed an affidavit claiming there was no will. The will exists. It names me as beneficiary and executor. And as of today, that's on record. Silence. Longer this time. Then if what you're saying is accurate, he said slowly, then your parents misrepresented ownership, yes, and the title is now clouded. It will be within the hour. Another pause, then a quiet exhale. In that case, he said, Iron Gate will not proceed with any entry or development activity until this is resolved. Put that in writing, I said. We will. The line ended. I slipped the phone back into my pocket just as the clerk returned with the final certified packet. She handed it to me. Stacked, stamped, complete. Everything you requested, she said. I took it. The weight of it wasn't physical. It was structural. Every page connected. Every timestamp aligned. Every lie anchored to something that could be proven. I glanced down at the top sheet one more time, then closed the folder, because this wasn't about arguing anymore. It was about filing, and once something is filed, it doesn't go away. By the time I left the county building, the light was already starting to drop. I didn't go home. I drove straight back to Mercer Hollow. The road felt the same. The fields looked the same. But the structure underneath it, the part no one could see, had shifted. When I turned onto the gravel path leading to the gate, I saw it immediately. Fresh stakes, thin wooden markers with bright flags tied near the top. Pushed into the edge of the front pasture, survey prep, and hanging on the gate, a brand new sign, no trespassing property, under contract. My father stood beside it like he'd been waiting, arms folded, chin up, that same controlled expression he used when he thought he'd already won. My mother leaned against his truck, relaxed. Watching me pull up like this was entertainment. I stepped out, closed the door. No rush. You came back, my father said. Ready to sign? I didn't answer. I reached into the folder, pulled out the recorder receipt, and held it up just enough for him to see. There's a probate case now, I said, filed today, and a notice of pending action recorded against the parcel. My mother's smile didn't fade. It sharpened. That won't stop tomorrow, she said. Survey crew arrives in the morning. The sheriff doesn't enforce fraud, I said. My father's eyes narrowed. Watch. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Voicemail. I didn't check it privately. I hit play. Mr. Mercer, this is the sheriff's office. We received a report that you're trespassing on property, currently under contract with Iron Gate Development. A deputy is en route. The wind carried the message across the field. My father didn't react. My mother didn't blink. They'd planned that. I called the number back. Evan Mercer, I said. I just received a trespass complaint. I need the incident number, reporting party, and assigned deputy. A pause. Typing. Then, incident number. She read it out. I repeated it, and the reporting party. Another pause. Elaine Mercer. I looked at my mother. She didn't look away. Add this to the notes, I said into the phone. There's an active probate case filed today, and a recorded notice of pending action against the property. Instrument numbers are available. Understood, the dispatcher said. I ended the call. No argument, no escalation, just documentation. I took out my phone again and started taking photos. The sign, the stakes, the gate, my parents standing beside it. Wide shots, close shots, angles that showed context, not emotion, evidence. Gravel crunched behind me. A patrol SUV rolled in, slow and controlled. The deputy stepped out, calm posture, body cam centered, eyes already reading the situation. Evan Mercer, he asked. Yes, Deputy Mason Reed. He glanced toward my parents, then back to me. They're stating you're trespassing on property, under contract with Iron Gate Development. My father stepped forward immediately. She's been causing problems all day, he said, loud enough to carry. We sold the farm. He refuses to accept it. Now he's trespassing. I didn't react. Deputy Reed looked at me. Your side. I didn't give him a story. I gave him the record. Probate case filed today, I said. A will was located and certified. Notice of pending action recorded this afternoon. Title is disputed. My mother scoffed. There is no will, she said sharply. I didn't turn to her. My mother accessed the deposited will packet yesterday morning, I said, then signed an affidavit stating it didn't exist. The access log is part of the record. That got the deputy's attention. He held out a hand toward my father. Paperwork. My father pushed his documents forward. Purchase agreement. Clean, simple, incomplete. Deputy Reed flipped through it. Where's the recorded deed? He asked. It's in process, my father said. The deputy looked back at me. Do you have your documentation? I handed him the recorder receipts, instrument numbers, timestamps, barcodes. He read them carefully, then stepped aside and keyed his radio. Dispatch. Confirm parcel record. Check for notices filed today. Static. Then parcel shows notice of pending action recorded this afternoon. Probate-related filing. Title flagged for dispute. The deputy nodded once, then turned back. This is a civil matter with active filings, he said. No one's being removed tonight. My father's voice rose. So he can just stand here, no, the deputy said. Neither of you can act like this is settled. My mother stepped forward. He's harassing us. Then you file for a protective order, the deputy replied. You don't use a trespass complaint when the title is already disputed. My father tried again. The survey crew is coming tomorrow. Sheriff will be here. Deputy Reed's expression changed. No one is escorting anyone onto disputed property based on a private contract, he said. If a crew shows up and there's a problem, we document it. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My phone buzzed. Email. I glanced at it. Patrick Haynes. Iron Gate. Will not proceed with entry or development pending resolution. I held the screen out just enough for the deputy to see. Developers Council confirmed they're not moving forward, I said. He nodded. Good. Then he turned to my parents. And for the record, he added, false statements to initiate a law enforcement response can be addressed. That landed. My mother's expression shifted, just slightly. The deputy took photos, the sign, the stakes, the documents. Then he wrote in his notebook, deliberate, final. I'm not escalating this tonight, he said. If anything happens tomorrow, call it in. He looked at my parents. And stop using trespass complaints while the record is flagged. He got back into his vehicle and drove off. The dust settled slowly. My father stood there, jaw tight. My mother stepped closer to me. You think you stopped this? She whispered. I didn't answer, because I didn't need to stop them. I just needed to slow them down long enough for the court to catch up. The next morning, I was back at the farm before sunrise. The air was cold. Still, then I heard it. Engines. 2 trucks rolled in. Survey crew. Equipment in the back, and behind them, another patrol unit. Deputy Reed again. My father stepped forward immediately. They're here, he said. Tell him to leave. The deputy didn't look at me. He looked at the document in his hand. I received a court order this morning, he said. He held it up. Temporary restraining order. No entry. No survey work. No alteration of property. He turned to the crew. Pack up. They didn't argue. They started moving. My mother's voice cut through. This is ridiculous. Ma'am, the deputy said. Step back. My father lost it. You can't do this. We already sold it. You sold something you didn't have the authority to sell, the deputy replied. That was it. That was the line. My father grabbed one of the survey stakes and ripped it out of the ground, wood splintering. Flag, snapping in the wind. Sir, the deputy said sharply. Stop. My father didn't. He threw it, like force could override paperwork. Hands behind your back. Silence. For half a second. Then the cuffs clicked, metal, closing over his wrists, in the same wind that moved through the fields my grandfather used to walk. My mother froze. My father twisted once, anger turning into something else. Too late. The deputy guided him toward the vehicle. No rush, no drama, just procedure. And for the first time since this started, no one argued, because the record had already spoken, and now so had the law. The farm didn't change that morning. The wind still moved the same way across the fields. The barn door still groaned when it shifted on its hinges. The house stood exactly where it always had, but the structure around it, the part that actually determines what something is worth. Who controls it? Who answers for it? That changed fast. Probate moved quicker than most people expect when the facts are clean. The will was filed. The codicil was entered with it, certified, time-stamped, attached to a case number that didn't exist 2 days earlier. By the end of the week, I was formally appointed executor of Walter Mercer's estate. Not provisionally, not pending, officially. The court didn't need a long argument. The documents did the work. The affidavit my parents had filed stating there was no will was already part of the record. So was the access log showing my mother opened the deposited will packet the morning before that affidavit was signed. And the receipt. The one detail they couldn't explain away. Paid, printed, time-stamped. The same day she swore it didn't exist. That wasn't a discrepancy, it was intent. The judge didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. He ordered the transfer instrument flagged and challenged. A quiet title action was initiated to unwind the conveyance to Iron Gate Development. Their legal team showed up prepared, not defensive, focused, because from their perspective, they hadn't just stepped into a bad deal. They'd been sold something that didn't exist. They withdrew from the purchase, formally, on record, and preserved every communication they had with my parents. Emails, contracts, representations of authority, all of it. Because once a company like that realizes fraud is involved, they don't argue, they document, and they protect themselves. The courtroom wasn't loud. There were no dramatic speeches, just pages, statements, questions that only needed one answer. The judge looked at the will, then the codicil, then the affidavit, then the receipt, and that was enough. He referred both of my parents for prosecution. Filing a false instrument, perjury tied to sworn statements, attempted fraud in a property transaction. Charges that don't get dismissed because someone says it was a family misunderstanding. They were given arraignment dates, bond conditions, and a no-contact order. They weren't allowed back on the property, not while the case was active, not without violating court orders again, for the first time in my life. Mercer Hollow felt quiet for the right reason, not because something was missing, because something had been put back where it belonged. Months passed. The legal process finished what it started. The title was restored, clean, clear, back under the estate, then transferred according to the will, to me. The county updated the public record. Every prior instrument tied to that transfer was flagged, challenged, or voided, not erased, recorded, because that's how it works. The truth doesn't replace the lie. It sits next to it, stamped, permanent. Iron gate, recovered damages through civil action. They didn't come back, didn't need to. The risk wasn't worth it. My father didn't recover the way he thought he would. The case moved forward, the charges held, and eventually he served time. Not long enough to be dramatic, long enough to matter, long enough that every future decision involving his name would carry that record with it. My mother took a different path, a plea, restitution, restrictions. She wasn't allowed to represent authority over any estate property again, not after signing something that said the opposite of what she knew was true. The farm stayed. That was the part that mattered. The fields were planted, the systems repaired, the boundaries walked again, not because they needed it, but because that's how you keep something like this from slipping. I didn't celebrate, didn't need to, because nothing about this felt like a win. It felt like something being corrected, something that should have never moved in the first place, being put back where it belonged. And once it was, there wasn't anything left to say. In Blackstone County, people talk. They always have, but talk doesn't move anything. Records do. Every document my parents filed is still there. Every timestamp, every signature, every line they thought would hold long enough to make it real. It didn't, because once something is entered into the record, it stops being a story, it becomes fact. And facts don't argue. They don't explain themselves. They just sit there, stamped, indexed, and permanent, waiting for anyone willing to look. My father tried to call it a misunderstanding. Paperwork confusion, lawyers turning a family disagreement into something bigger than it was. But there's a limit to how far that explanation goes. When the same record shows your name on both sides of the truth, my mother stopped coming into town, not because anyone forced her out, because every conversation eventually circled back to the same question no one needed to say out loud. How do you swear something doesn't exist? The day after you paid for a copy of it, Mercer Hollow didn't change. The porch still creaks in the same spots. The barn still shifts when the wind hits it from the west. The fields still move the way they always have, slow, steady, like they don't care who thinks they own them. But something did change. The land isn't vulnerable anymore. Not to pressure, not to speed, not to someone who thinks signing enough paper makes something true. My grandfather used to say land teaches patience. He was right, because the truth works the same way. It doesn't rush, it doesn't force itself into the open. It waits. And when it finally shows up, when it's documented, recorded, and impossible to ignore, there isn't anything left that can push it back. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's simple. Trust doesn't replace accountability, and silence doesn't make something legitimate. If something feels off, slow it down. Check the record, because the truth is usually already there. People just don't look. If you made it this far, I appreciate you staying with me. Stories like this aren't easy, because they don't come from strangers. They come from people who are supposed to know better, but they matter, because they remind you that integrity isn't something you talk about. It's something you prove, especially when no one's expecting you to. If this story meant something to you, take a second to like the video. Drop a comment. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted them directly, or would you have done what I did? And let the record speak. And if you want more stories like this, real grounded and built on truth, subscribe. There's more coming. I'll see you there. Disclaimer. This story is a fictionalized narrative inspired by common legal and family conflict scenarios. It is not legal advice.